My rich grandpa smiled. How do you spend your $3,400,000 trust fund? I blinked. What trust fund? Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Raina Holt, and up until that moment, I thought I was just a regular woman trying to survive. I worked 2 jobs, lived in a small apartment, and counted every dollar. My grandpa, Elias Holt, was a quiet man with old-fashioned manners. He was wealthy, but he never showed it off. I loved him for his warmth and stories, not his money. That day, when he asked me about a trust fund, I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. But the confusion on his face told me he wasn't. He truly believed I had been living off a $3.4 million trust fund he'd set up for me years ago. My heart started pounding as I told him I had never received a cent. He looked pale and called his lawyer right away. Within hours, the truth started to unfold. Grandpa had created a trust when I was 10, right after my parents divorced. He had wanted to make sure I'd always be secure. But the documents showed my mother, Clara, had been managing it in my name. Every year, she had signed my name, taking money meant for me. Over 15 years, she had drained almost everything. My chest felt tight as I realized that all the times she'd said, "We're broke," she had been lying. I drove straight to her house. She looked surprised to see me, especially when I asked about the trust fund. At first, she played dumb. Then she tried to twist it around, saying she did it for my future, that I wouldn't have known what to do with that kind of money. I couldn't believe her calmness. She had stolen my chance at a better life and acted like it was kindness. I walked out shaking, tears blurring my vision. Grandpa was furious but heartbroken. He told his lawyer to protect what was left and promised to make sure I would never be cheated again. He warned me not to let revenge eat me alive, but deep inside I couldn't let it go. I needed her to face what she'd done. We worked quietly with the lawyer. My stepfather, who was an accountant, had helped her forge my signature and hide the money. Soon, the IRS got involved. Their perfect life crumbled. My mother called me crying, saying they might lose everything and needed my help. I told her softly, "I'm fixing this, Mom. Just not for you." A few months later, Grandpa passed away peacefully, knowing I was safe. I used the small amount he left me to build a modest life. I didn't chase wealth. I chased peace. Sometimes I still hear his words. Money shows who people really are. He was right. I lost a mother, but I found my truth, and that was worth more than any trust fund. Elias looked so confused when I told him I had never seen or heard of any trust fund. His brow furrowed like he couldn't make sense of my words. He leaned back in his chair and asked if I was sure, his voice trembling just slightly. I nodded, feeling my stomach twist. I could see the disbelief in his eyes. He called his attorney right away, and as they talked, small details began to spill out. The fund had been created when I was 10 years old, just after my parents' divorce. Grandpa had wanted to make sure I'd have something secure when I grew up. He had chosen my mother, Clara, as the guardian to oversee it until I was old enough. He trusted her completely. My mother had always told me that Grandpa didn't believe in giving people money. She said he thought hard work built character, and that he wanted me to stand on my own 2 feet. I believed her because why wouldn't I? She was my mom, and she never let me think I was missing out on anything. Now, sitting there in that room, I felt like the ground was moving beneath me. Grandpa's attorney pulled out copies of signed forms and letters that had been sent to my mother every year. Progress reports, financial summaries, account balances. They had all been signed under my name, but I had never seen any of them. The handwriting was hers, not mine. Every page felt like another knife twisting deeper. Grandpa looked broken. His lips trembled as he read through the papers. He whispered something under his breath that sounded like, "She betrayed us both." I couldn't speak. I felt numb, staring at my name written in a hand that wasn't mine. My childhood, my teenage years, all those times I thought we were just struggling to make it through, they were built on lies. Memories flashed through my mind, her telling me we couldn't afford new clothes, that college was out of reach, that Grandpa didn't care about us. Every word, every story she'd told to make me pity her, now felt like poison. She had twisted his generosity into her secret. I left the lawyer's office that day feeling hollow. The drive home felt endless. I kept replaying her words from years ago, all the times she'd told me Grandpa was stubborn, distant, cheap. The truth was, she had stolen everything he had tried to give me. When I finally got home, I sat in the dark, trying to process it all. The woman who raised me, the person I trusted most, had built my life on deception. The shock had turned into something colder, heavier, betrayal. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that nothing between us would ever be the same again. Grandpa sat quietly for a long moment before he spoke. His voice was steady, but I could feel the anger behind it. He told his attorney to bring out every document, every transaction, every piece of proof that showed where the money had gone. The lawyer opened a thick folder, and the sound of paper sliding across the table made my chest tighten. Each page told a story I didn't want to read. There were detailed records of withdrawals spread over more than a decade. The numbers were staggering: payments for education, living costs, and investments that I had never seen or heard of. I leaned closer, and that's when I noticed my name at the bottom of each page, written neatly in a signature that wasn't mine. I felt my throat close up. My own mother had faked my signature. The woman who used to hold my hand when I was scared had turned my name into her weapon. Grandpa's jaw clenched as he read the statement. There were transfers to accounts under her control, property purchased in cash, and even a small business listed under her maiden name. Every line felt like another betrayal stacked on top of the last. The worst part was the timeline. For 15 years, while I was skipping meals and working night shifts, she had been spending the money meant for my future. She hadn't blown it on wild luxuries. She had lived just comfortably enough to look innocent. She called it modesty, but it was all built from stolen trust. I remembered nights when she told me we couldn't afford heat, how she'd sigh and say, "We just have to get through it, sweetheart." All the while, she had more than enough hidden away. My hands started to shake as I flipped through another stack of papers showing deposits to a private account. Grandpa's pale face said everything I couldn't. His eyes, once filled with pride, now looked hollow. The attorney kept reading figures, but the numbers blurred together. I could barely hear anything over the sound of my own heartbeat. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about every moment she had looked me in the eyes and lied without flinching. I felt sick thinking of how many birthdays, how many hard years, could have been different if she had simply told the truth. Grandpa placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. His skin was cold, his voice even colder. "She took everything I meant for you," he whispered. I couldn't find any words to answer him. The silence in that room felt heavy, like it would never leave us. The proof was there in black and white: her name, my stolen future, and a betrayal that couldn't be undone. All I could do was stare at the papers and wonder how a mother could do that to her own child. The drive to her neighborhood felt longer than usual, every mile pressing heavier on my chest. The houses looked peaceful under the afternoon sun, but all I could see was the truth waiting behind one front door. When I parked outside her home, the place looked exactly as I remembered: neat lawn, new paint. Nothing about it spoke of struggle. My fingers trembled as I rang the bell. She opened the door with a surprised smile that froze when she saw my face. "Reina, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft, pretending concern. I didn't answer. I just said Grandpa's lawyer wanted to talk about the trust fund. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before she tried to recover. "What trust fund?" she said, her voice a little too calm. I stared at her, waiting. She crossed her arms, the smile gone now. I told her everything: the documents, the forged signatures, the transfers. I watched the color drain from her cheeks. For a moment, she looked cornered, but then her expression hardened. She started talking fast, her words coming out sharp and defensive. "You wouldn't have known what to do with that kind of money," she snapped. "You were a kid, Reina. I handled it the right way." My stomach turned at her tone, like she still believed she was doing me a favor. I told her it wasn't her decision to make. Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer. "Don't take that tone with me," she said quietly, like I was a child again. I could feel old habits pulling at me, that urge to back down, to stay quiet. But this time I didn't move. I asked her why she never told me, why she lied for so many years. She sighed dramatically and shook her head. "You think life's that simple? I paid bills. I kept a roof over your head. Everything I did was for your future." The words came out rehearsed, as if she had said them before, maybe even believed them. I looked around the house, the polished floors, the framed vacation photos, the things she once said she couldn't afford. It all screamed of the truth she'd buried. "You didn't do this for me," I said quietly. "You did it for yourself." She didn't answer. Her face went cold, unreadable. When I turned to leave, she called after me. "Don't you walk away from me, young lady." Her voice cracked with something that sounded like fear. I stopped at the door but didn't turn back. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from understanding. She hadn't just stolen money. She had built her comfort out of my life. As I stepped outside, the air felt strange, heavy but clean. I finally saw her for who she really was. I wasn't her daughter in her eyes. I was her safety net, her plan for the future. And I knew in that moment, that part of my life was over. The following week, Grandpa's lawyer called again. His voice sounded tense, almost hesitant, as he asked me to come to his office. When I arrived, a thick envelope sat on his desk, filled with new documents. He took a deep breath before speaking, explaining that he had dug deeper into my mother's financial record. What he found left even him speechless. There were receipts for expensive hotels in places she had never mentioned: ocean view suites, private resorts, first-class flights. Each one paid for with money linked directly to the trust. There were property deeds too, including one for a lake house hidden under a small holding company. I remembered her talking about helping a friend manage some paperwork years ago. Now I knew that friend was a lie. The house had been hers all along. Then came the investments. A well-managed stock portfolio worth more than I could ever imagine, all listed under her maiden name. It was as if she had built a secret life using money meant for future. I sat frozen, staring at the papers while my mind struggled to make sense of it all. But it didn't stop there. The lawyer's voice softened when he mentioned my stepfather. For years, I'd seen him as quiet, kind, the man who balanced my mother's moods. He used to help me with math homework, patient and calm. Now, I learned he had been the one handling the financial document. He wasn't just aware of what my mother was doing, he had been part of it. Being an accountant gave him all the tools he needed to make everything look legitimate. He created reports, adjusted figures, and even managed the transfers between their accounts. Every time I thought about him sitting at the dinner table, smiling politely, I felt a cold wave run through me. He had helped her turn betrayal into a profession. Together, they had used my name to create a life of comfort. The cars, the trips, the expensive dinners, all of it paid for with money that was supposed to be my foundation. I imagined them laughing about how everything worked out, never thinking I'd find out. That evening, Grandpa sat in his study, staring out the window as the sun went down. The light made his silver hair glow, but his eyes looked darker than I'd ever seen them. I told him everything the lawyer had uncovered. He didn't say much at first. He just nodded slowly, his jaw tight. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "We'll handle this the whole way." I didn't know exactly what he meant, but the tone in his voice carried a promise. It wasn't anger, it was resolve. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about restoring what had been taken from both of us. And in that quiet moment, I knew things were far from over. Grandpa had begun to tire easily, his steps slower, his voice weaker, but his mind stayed clear as ever. He spent most mornings in his study, surrounded by papers and quiet determination. When I sat beside him, he spoke less about the past and more about what needed to be done now. His lawyer visited often, carrying folders and forms that Grandpa read carefully before signing. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across the desk, he explained what he was doing. He had arranged for everything he still owned, the house, the land, his savings, to be placed into a new trust. This one would be locked under my name alone. No one else could touch it, not even the lawyer without my consent. It wasn't about wealth. It was about making sure the last thing my mother could take was gone for good. I wanted to argue that he didn't have to do this, that I didn't need another trust after what had happened. But he only smiled faintly and told me it wasn't about needing, it was about setting things right. "You've already lost enough," he said. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for mine. "This is for peace of mind, mine and yours." He could sense what I was thinking even before I said it. He warned me not to let hate take over. He wanted me to focus on rebuilding, to live for something more than anger. "Don't waste your heart chasing what's already broken," he murmured. I nodded, but deep inside, my thoughts were far from peaceful. Every time I remembered my mother's calm lies and my stepfather's silent complicity, the anger rose again. Late one evening, I found him sitting by the fireplace, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. He asked me to promise him something, that when he was gone, I would move forward, not backward. He wanted me to find purpose, to travel, to study, to live freely. I promised, though part of me already knew I couldn't keep that promise completely, because as much as I wanted to honor him, the thought of them walking away untouched burned inside me. They had stolen more than money. They had taken years of my life, opportunities that could never return. I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. After he went to bed, I sat alone in the dark, listening to the clock tick. The lawyer's words echoed in my head about the investigation, about what could be done quietly, legally. There were ways to make sure the truth reached the right ears, ways to make sure they faced what they had built with my name. I decided that night that I wouldn't confront them again. I wouldn't scream or beg. I would do exactly what Grandpa taught me, handle it the whole way. But my way would carry something different, justice wrapped in silence, patience, and a promise that they would never see it coming. The plan started quietly, with no shouting, no confrontation, just steady patience. Every afternoon, I sat in the lawyer's office, reviewing files stacked in tall piles. We went through every signature, each withdrawal, and every record that tied my name to money I never touched. It felt endless, but I kept at it. The lawyer made copies of every page, careful to keep a trail that would hold up under any question. Together, we built a timeline, a story told through numbers that revealed everything they had done. We didn't rush. Grandpa's voice echoed in my head each time frustration tried to break through, calm, deliberate, controlled. He'd said to do things the whole way, and I intended to honor that. The first step was to make sure the right authorities saw what we had uncovered. My stepfather's spotless reputation as an accountant was the first thread to pull. His company handled money for small businesses, including his own. The irregular transfers hidden inside his ledgers weren't hard to spot once the lawyer knew where to look. A few weeks later, quiet whispers began to spread in their neighborhood. Something about the IRS reviewing certain accounts. I didn't make the call or send the report, but once the documents were filed properly, the system took over. All I had to do was stand back and let the truth surface. When I heard they were being audited, a part of me felt relief, not satisfaction. I hadn't screamed, hadn't begged, hadn't done anything impulsive. I had simply shown the truth and stepped aside. The lawyer advised me not to contact them, not even once. I agreed, but late at night, I found myself imagining their faces when they saw the letters arrive. The panic, the disbelief, the realization that their careful world was cracking. 3 weeks after the investigation began, my phone rang late in the evening. Her voice was shaking. "Reina," she sobbed, "they froze our accounts. They're saying things about fraud, about false reports. You have to help us. You can't let this happen." Her words tumbled over each other, desperate and frightened. For the first time, she sounded smaller than I remembered. I let the silence stretch before answering. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. "I am fixing it, Mom," I said quietly. "Just not for you." There was a pause, a deep, sharp breath on the other end, and then the line went dead. When I set the phone down, my hands trembled, not from guilt, but from release. For years, I had been the one cleaning up her messes, the one she relied on. This time, I was the one ending it. I walked to the window, looking out at the fading evening light, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless. I felt free, not because justice was loud, but because it was finally real. The storm hit faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, their lives began to unravel piece by piece. Notices arrived at their door, official letters stamped with government seals. The accounts they once used so freely were suddenly frozen. Payments bounced, credit lines collapsed, and the comfortable world they had built around lies began to crumble. Their house, the same one my mother once called her pride, didn't stay theirs for long. The mortgage company claimed it after missed payments stacked up. I heard from the lawyer that movers came in one morning while she stood outside, watching strangers carry out furniture she'd bought with stolen money. The neighbors whispered, doors closing as she tried to explain, but no one believed her story. The lake house didn't survive either. The government seized it along with the investments tied to false documents. That quiet escape spot she had kept secret was no longer hers to hide in. She had once bragged about the peaceful view over the water, the place she went to think. Now it was gone, stripped away just like the illusion she had built. Without their wealth to protect them, the bond between her and my stepfather began to fracture. Arguments turned into shouting matches that the neighbors could hear through the walls. The lawyer told me she had filed for separation not long after the repossession. The man who once smiled politely across the dinner table had vanished the moment the money did. For the first time, she had to face the reality of her choices, alone, with nothing left to shield her from herself. I didn't see any of it firsthand. I kept my distance, letting the lawyer handle the updates. I didn't need revenge served in person. The truth had already done what I never could. The same greed that had driven them was now tearing them apart. During that time, Grandpa's health declined. He spent more days resting, his voice faint but calm whenever we spoke. He didn't ask for details about what was happening to them. He didn't need to. He only cared that I was safe, that the weight I had carried for so long was finally off my shoulders. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand and tell me he could see the peace in my eyes again. One quiet morning, I sat beside him as he dozed off, sunlight filtering through the curtain. He smiled faintly and whispered that he was proud of me, not for what had been taken back, but for surviving it all. That afternoon, he passed away in his sleep, his face serene, like he'd finally let go of the burden he'd carried for years. I stayed beside him for a long time, holding his hand, realizing he had left me with something far more valuable than money. He had given me freedom, from lies, from guilt, from the people who had used me. And in that stillness, I understood that justice had found its end. When the paperwork finally cleared, the rest of Grandpa's estate became mine. The lawyer handed me a small stack of documents and a key, but I felt no rush to use any of it. The money sat untouched in the account for months. I didn't want it to feel like a reward or a replacement for everything that had been taken. I needed time to breathe, to understand what freedom really meant without guilt or anger shaping it. I found a small house on the edge of town, simple and quiet, with a porch that caught the morning sun. It wasn't grand or impressive, but it felt right. I furnished it slowly, choosing only what I needed. For the first time, every choice was mine alone. No one else's signature hovered over my life. No one else's voice told me what I could or couldn't have. That peace was worth more than any check or inheritance. As months passed, I began to think about what Grandpa would have wanted. Not revenge, not bitterness, but purpose. He had always believed in second chances, even when people didn't deserve them. So I decided to do something that would carry his name in a way he would have been proud of. I set up a small scholarship, meant for kids who grew up with nothing but broken promises. It wasn't large, but it was real. Each award letter carried his name, not as a wealthy man's gift, but as a reminder that kindness can survive even betrayal. Every time I signed one of those letters, I felt a strange mix of sadness and strength. My revenge had never truly been about watching my mother fall apart. It was about reclaiming what she couldn't destroy, my integrity. Living freely honestly was the only victory that mattered. I stopped checking on her situation after a while. The curiosity faded with time. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was familiar, shaky, and thin. My mother wrote from a small apartment somewhere out of state. She said she missed me, that she thought about me every day, that she hoped one day I could forgive her. She didn't ask for money, only understanding. For a long time, I stared at the page, searching for sincerity between the lines, but all I could see was history repeating itself, words meant to pull me back into her orbit. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say, nothing that could undo what had been done. She had made her choices. Now I was making mine. That night, as I sat on the porch, the air was quiet except for the crickets and the soft hum of the wind. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped fighting. My revenge was simply living a life she could never touch. There are quiet mornings when I sit by the window with my coffee and hear his voice again, calm, steady, and full of wisdom. Money shows who people really are, he used to say, and those words linger in the stillness like an echo I can't forget. Back then, I never fully understood what he meant. Now, every memory of the past makes that truth sharper, clearer. I lost more than a fortune in that fight. I lost the idea of family I had clung to my entire life. My mother's betrayal didn't just take money. It stripped away trust, the fragile thread that held everything together. Yet somewhere within that loss, I found something stronger. I found truth, and with it came a quiet kind of peace that no amount of wealth could ever buy. Sometimes, when I walk through my small house, I think about how different my life might have been if none of this had happened, if the trust fund had been untouched, if lies had never replaced love. But then I remind myself that peace isn't built from what we're given, it's built from what we survive. Grandpa's lessons shaped that understanding. He believed that dignity wasn't measured by dollars, but by the choices we make when faced with betrayal. It took time to let go of the anger. For months, I carried it like a shadow, heavy and familiar. But peace came slowly, in moments that didn't demand attention, quiet evenings, laughter with friends, the soft comfort of knowing I was no longer someone's pawn. Each passing day made me realize that revenge wasn't the answer. It was too small for what I needed. What I truly wanted was freedom. Freedom from the bitterness, from the past, from her voice echoing through my head with excuses and blame. Grandpa's photograph sits on the mantel now, framed in oak. Sometimes I talk to it as if he's still sitting beside me, listening the way he always did. I tell him that I kept my promise, that I built a life worth living, one guided by honesty instead of anger. He would smile at that, maybe tease me for taking so long to understand. The story that began with a question about a trust fund ended with something far greater than inheritance. It became a reminder that when love is traded for greed, everyone loses. But when truth is faced head-on, something new is born. I lost a mother, yes, but I found myself. And in that discovery, I realized peace costs more than money ever could. It asks for courage, patience, and the willingness to start again. That's what Grandpa wanted for me all along. And now, as I close this chapter, I know his words will stay with me forever. A quiet promise that reclaiming your worth is the truest revenge of all. Hey besties, thanks for staying with me till the end of this wild journey. Imagine finding out your own mom stole your $3.4 million trust fund and smiling while you struggled to survive. Painful, right? But sometimes losing everything helps you find yourself again. If this story hit your heart, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories. See you next time, besties.